Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carol Lee Makes Cards. I had hoped that I would be able to do this post a little bit sooner, but things just didn't work out that way. As some of you may know, I was on vacation in London when things really ramped up regarding the virus. Getting home and settling into self-isolation has certainly been challenging. Dealing with what used to be a mundane task such as getting food in the house was not easy. And to top things off, my dog needed to see a vet. Thank goodness for family and friends. So now I'm settled into a new routine and I have a card to share with you featuring Studio Katia, You're So Sweet. I began by creating an ink smooshed background. I like to layer on my colors one at a time, working lightest to darkest. I stamp the ink pad directly on the media mat and spritz it with water. I pick up the ink with my cardstock, making sure that the color is evenly distributed. After drying with the heat tool, I then proceed to the next color. Following this procedure, I find I have better control over the color distribution. Next, I'm going to work on a small grouping of sweet pea flowers. I'm using a faux watercolor technique with Tombow markers. To ink up the stamp, I have the marker at an angle and swipe it across the raised area. I stamp the image and then I repeat the inking, spritzing it with water and stamp again. I apply just a little bit of water. Too much will cause pooling. I forgot to mention that I am working on Bristol Smooth cardstock. I did try this technique using watercolor paper but found that it was hard to pull the color. Bristol Smooth can withstand a little bit of water, so it works well. After the spritzed image has been stamped again, I use a watercolor brush to help pull that color. I take the marker directly to the paper anywhere I want to add some additional shadow areas. After each image is colored, if I feel that I require some more definition, I will go back again and re-ink the stamp for a third time. For each of the sweet pea blooms, I use Tombow marker 743, which is a dark pink. The stems and leaves were colored with Tombow 249, a dark green. This technique is a very easy way to create a no-line watercolor look. I have also tried this technique using both Arteza and Zig real brush markers. The result was not as effective as using the Tombows. I think the inflexible brush makes the distribution of the ink on the stamp more even. And as I mentioned earlier, working on Bristol Smooth cardstock as opposed to watercolor paper works better as well. Next, I fussy cut the image. This did take a little bit of time as I did not want to leave any bordering around the flowers. I will admit that fussy cutting is my least favorite thing to do. I do have a scan and cut, but I was nervous to use it on this image. So here I am cutting away. I am using a pair of snips by Tim Holtz, and they are actually very comfortable to use. They easily maneuver around all the twists and turns around the flowers. For my next step, I go back to my ink smooshed panel. I use the rectangular die from Pink Fresh Studios Pretty Frames to die cut both the ink smooshed background and another piece of white cardstock. This one die actually creates 4 different frames. Even though I ran the panels through the die cutter a couple of times, I still had to use my scissors just to help release the frames from each other in a couple of places. I alternate the ink smoosh frames with the white ones. After the frames are laid out, I tape them together. These are fine frames and I just find it easier to manage them when they're all in one piece. The Pretty Frames die set also comes with a second die that fits within the rectangular die cut. I use this die to cut the central panel, another piece of white cardstock, and a piece of white sheet foam. I use the thin frame from the white cardstock and attach it to my background panel using Scotch tape. After I've trimmed off all the Scotch tape around the edge of my panel, I set that aside so that I can work on my sentiment panel. The sentiment, Just Because, is stamped on the dark pink cardstock with Versamark ink. I use Wow Opaque Bright White to emboss it. After trimming down the pink cardstock around the sentiment, I attach it to a piece of white cardstock. I then trim around that so that I leave about 1/8 of an inch frame. The inner ink smoosh panel is then attached to the white sheet foam die cut. I pop my MISTI on top so that I have good contact between the foam and cardstock. While waiting for that to dry, I use an X-Acto knife on the floral image to remove a little bit of background that I couldn't get at with my scissors. To assemble the card, I first attach the series of frames to a Neenah Solar White 110-pound card base with white glue. I then adhere the raised center panel to the base. I pop my MISTI on top so that there's good contact and let it dry completely. Foam squares are cut into smaller pieces so that they can fit on the back of the floral image. The sweet peas are then placed on the front of the card. The card is finished up with a few of Studio Cash's vintage shimmer pearls placed around the sweet peas and the sentiment. I hope that you like this card and enjoyed watching the video today. More importantly, I hope you find some peace, hope, and even joy in the challenging days that lie ahead of us. Please take care and stay safe.